After weeks of offensive struggles, could the New Orleans Saints be making the leap back to Jameis Winston as their starting quarterback against the Los Angeles Rams this weekend? We got all of that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always. Make Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me every day over at CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, daily fantasy made easy. It's you versus the house. You pick 2 to 5 players, whether they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You get those right, you can get up to 10 times your entry. It's awesome. So if you're a first-time user, make sure you're also checking it out. Use the promo code LOCKEDON so you get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. Once again, that's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. On today's episode, we're taking a look and doing a deep dive into the numbers. So I'm going to give you 3 numbers, and we'll sprinkle in some others for context here, but 3 of the most important numbers that solidify and sort of exemplify the offensive struggles for the New Orleans Saints as they continued against the Pittsburgh Steelers, why the New Orleans Saints defense has been so disappointing in terms of its expectations going into the season. But first, I want to take a look at Jameis Winston and his potential return as the Saints starting quarterback against the Los Angeles Rams. We met with Dennis Allen during yesterday's post-game or day after press conference. And one of the questions that he was asked was whether or not the Saints would be looking at potential changes at any positions, more specifically the quarterback spot. And from what it all sounds like, if he's healthy enough, Jameis Winston could get another shot as the Saints starting quarterback, and it could happen as early as this week. If the Saints were to make a decision to make a quarterback change and move away from Andy Dalton after weeks of offensive inefficiency, offensive lack of production, all of these other things, the feeling is that Jameis Winston is very much a candidate for the role, depending upon how conversations go with the medical staff and Jameis Winston about his health. For more context on this, here's what Dennis Allen had to say about that very question.
Absolutely. I feel like I think probably have to visit with him a little bit in terms of that, or visit with the medical staff in terms of that. But, and I think Jameis said this the other day, I don't know that he's ever going to be 100% healthy this season. But he's in here every day. He's in here every morning, working with the trainers, getting himself ready. And I feel like he's closer to being there.
So if you've been waiting for a potential change at quarterback, it could be on the way. Now, there are a couple of key things that are mentioned within all of this. Dennis Allen also went on a little bit further with some clarification. So one of the things that he clarified was that with the decision being made to move forward with Andy Dalton ahead of the, they effectively made the quarterback change week 4 against the Minnesota Vikings in London, but it wasn't really kind of announced that Andy Dalton would be the guy moving forward until just before the Las Vegas Raiders game. And one of the reasons why was because of what Dennis Allen called a, quote, offensive decision, that as long as the offense was producing, putting points on the board, moving the ball, that they would continue to move ahead with Andy Dalton at quarterback. So he did mention that the decision to start Andy Dalton was based on the offensive success of the team at the time with him at the helm, but he also went on to clarify that the team hasn't been successful on offense really since that Las Vegas Raiders game. And so he solidified then that if Jameis Winston is healthy enough, that he is indeed a candidate to start this weekend. So that you know the timeline on this, as we know, timelines are something that a lot of Saints fans are curious about when it comes to the New Orleans Saints, and rightfully so. The first thing to note is that this press conference was yesterday on Monday. Dennis Allen said that he was going to be looking at these types of decisions, quote, today and tomorrow, so meaning Monday and Tuesday. So that means we may have a glimpse in terms of who will be the starting quarterback as early as tomorrow on Wednesday when media is out there on the practice field. So, of course, we'll keep you updated every step of the way here on Locked On Saints so that you know who's going to be under center when it comes to the New Orleans Saints going up against a team that's really in a similar situation as the New Orleans Saints in terms of not being able to live up to expectations so far this season in the Los Angeles Rams. Now, there are a couple of things that are worth mentioning. Are the New Orleans Saints all of a sudden going to go on a tear and become a playoff team because they made the decision to go back to Jameis Winston? Highly unlikely. I mean, right now, the New Orleans Saints have less than a 10% chance of making the playoffs, sitting at 3-7 through the first 10 games. They are in a hapless division, but as we spoke with Jarvis Landry about in the post-game pressers over in the locker room, one of the things that he mentioned is that looking so far ahead isn't healthy for this team right now and that they need to focus on a game-by-game basis. It's said that Cam Jordan addressed the locker room. Jarvis Landry is somebody that, of course, we spoke with as well. And one of the biggest sort of takeaways for this team is to go out there and focus on week to week, that they're not really in a position until they can start winning games to say, hey, we're still in reach of the division or there's still a playoff spot. Like, that narrative is done for this team. So even in the idea of saying, well, Jameis Winston isn't going to come in and lead the New Orleans Saints to the playoffs, that doesn't matter right now. That's not actually what the Saints are trying to do. The Saints are just trying to win games because they owe it to their players to do exactly that. And the players want to go out there and they want to go out and win as well. So get a guy like Jameis Winston back out on the field. If he's healthy enough to play, you're putting him behind an offensive line that only let up 9 pressures in terms of formal pressures when it came to Andy Dalton up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But now you've got Aaron Donald coming to town. You're only going to find so much success with the injuries that you have and all these other things. But as we've mentioned before, you have to put the players that are available to play out on the field. And so it doesn't matter, right? That can't be part of the decision. Part of the decision needs to be who is going to give you the best chance to win games. And right now, that doesn't look like Andy Dalton. So getting an opportunity to go back and get a look at Jameis Winston, if you can, if he's healthy enough, feels like the right decision to make. And honestly, should have been the plan all along. I've been pretty consistent about this, that I believed that once Jameis was healthy, he should have gotten an opportunity to go out there and prove whether or not he deserved to maintain the starting role that he earned going into this season. Now, there's the potential that he'll get that opportunity. Will it pay off? We'll see. We'll see. So we'll keep you up to date with what practice looks like, who looks like they're getting the first team snaps, and of course how all of this ends up moving along ahead of this weekend's matchup against the Los Angeles Rams. But we're not done taking a look at what's going on or what went on this past weekend with the Pittsburgh Steelers. New Orleans Saints offense has been, a struggle over the course of this season, but the defense has been disappointing, especially relative to their expectations. So what are the 3 numbers that help to tell the story of the defense's lack of success up against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday? We'll answer that question, and I'll give you everything you need to know as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. PrizePicks.com. That's the place to go to play daily fantasy sports the way that it should be. And honestly, in my opinion, the best way to play daily fantasy sports. You're not playing against a bunch of shadow lineups. You're not building a lineup off of salary caps. We know the salary cap doesn't exist. You're not building, lineups off of a salary cap to play against a bunch of, 3 million entries or whatever. No. It's super simple. You just use your football knowledge. It's you versus the house. Pick 2 to 5 players. Choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. If you get those right, you can get up to 10 times your entry back. And if you're a first-time user, you can use the promo code LOCKEDON on PrizePicks.com or on the Prize Picks app, and they'll give you a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. It means if you deposit $100, they'll match $100. You can go a little bit low, though. You can go 50, they'll match 50, whatever it is that you're looking for. As long as it's up to $100, they will match and keep you covered. So if you want to check that out, once again, that's promo code LOCKEDON over at prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app to start playing daily fantasy football today. Today's episode is also brought to you by our friends over at Simply Safe, SIMPLI Safe. Simply Safe is one of my favorite features that I have. I use it here because of all the traveling and having to go all over the place. Getting to go all over the place. Like, what a privilege. But, want to make sure that everything is safe at home, be able to monitor stuff as well, and also be able to rely on the 24/7 expert monitoring of Simply Safe as well to make sure that everything's okay while I'm gone. And just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of how this all works, you can find all of this over at Simply Safe right now for what is 50% off when it comes to the #1 rated Simply Safe home security system. It's the biggest offer of the year, and you're not going to want to miss it because it's going to make sure that you have a 24/7 monitoring agent or Simply Safe tech support staff at your disposal at all times to make sure that everything is okay. And with those 24/7 professional monitoring agents, they're going to be using their Fast Protect technology, which is exclusively from Simply Safe, to capture any critical evidence to verify that a threat is real and not just like your cat walking through or something like that, to make sure you get priority police response if there is an issue. So don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system that I recommend. Get 50% off of any new Simply Safe home security system at simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL today. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints offense has been a struggle, but the Saints defense may be the biggest disappointment so far this season. We're going to help tell the story of why that is, at least in the most recent loss up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. We appreciate you so much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports today. If you haven't heard me railing enough about the New Orleans Saints quarterback situation, you can go and check out today's Locked On Sports today to hear what all that I had to say about that situation as it continues on. Of course, they're bringing you beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts, bringing you the insight that only Locked On can provide. It's Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Okay. Relative to their expectations, the New Orleans Saints defense has been underwhelming. What do I mean by that? Remember, this is a defense that over the course of the last 2 years has been a top 5 scoring defense to finish out the season. Right now, they're 25th in the NFL in that very same metric. Many years as a top 3, top 5 rushing defense as well. In terms of rushing yards allowed, Saints right now 22nd in the NFL there. Many years as a top pass rushing unit as well. Remember, since Ryan Nielsen arrived as the then defensive line coach, now co-defensive coordinator, back in 2017, the Saints have had more than 40 sacks in every single one of those seasons within a 16-game span, even after the expansion to 17 games. Right now, the Saints are on pace to cross that threshold, 47.5 sacks. So things are getting better there. They right now have the 4th highest total in the NFL when it comes to sacks at 28. A couple of teams have 29. You got another team with 32. And then you have right now the league best pace being set at 35 by the Dallas Cowboys. But that's about the only thing that has sort of taken some steps forward for the New Orleans Saints defense. And remember, this defense had high expectations coming into the season because maybe we've forgotten about this, but there was an expectation in terms of the secondary being one of the best secondaries in the NFL. The issue is that corners, Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Bradley Roby, paired with the safeties, Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May, that unit of 5 players has not taken a single snap together so far this season. Paulson Adebo missing early. Marshawn Lattimore being hurt during the Seattle Seahawks game. Doesn't look like there's much optimism in him being back this coming week, maybe week 12 against the San Francisco 49ers. John Hendricks from over at Sports Illustrated reports, but doesn't seem like he's going to be working his way back in time for this Rams game. Bradley Roby's on injured reserve right now. Marcus May's been missing time. Saints secondary just hasn't been what the Saints secondary has been. And let's be honest, Paulson Adebo has taken a lot of steps back. So here are the 3 numbers that you can take away from this episode that will help you sort of exemplify the issues over on the Saints defensive side and the way that they kind of reared their ugly heads again over in Pittsburgh. 14 is an important number for you. 14 is the number of missed tackles the Saints had up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. What does that result in? It resulted in over 140 yards of yards after contact, meaning that players are breaking tackles or they're, not, your arm tackles aren't bringing guys down to the ground, whatever it might be, and in picking up over 140 yards after that first contact. And that wasn't just downfield stuff. That's in the run game. That was at the line of scrimmage. That was even in the backfield as well. Even Kenny Pickett had 22 yards after contact on his own, ended up rushing for over 50 by himself. And the Saints had 6 sacks in this game, but they had 17 total pressures, and they got their hands on Kenny Pickett quite a lot, but weren't always able to bring him down. And that resulted in some first downs, resulted in some plays being extended, in some drives being extended, things like that. So that 14 missed tackles in a single game, first of all, is an enormous number, but considering the nature of those tackles as well, or missed tackles as well, not great, Bob. 5.0 is your second number today. 5.0 yards per carry allowed in the run game. Najee Harris almost 1 yard away from a 100-yard day. That's another thing about this New Orleans Saints team so far this season. They've already allowed, I think it's four rushers over 90 yards, 2 of them over 100 yards. Benjamin just a few weeks ago, Kenneth Walker earlier on in the season, of course, Cordero Patterson to open the season, and then now you've got 99 yards by Najee Harris in this one, but then you add in 51 yards from quarterback Kenny Pickett, 22 yards from wide receiver, or 23 yards, from wide receiver George Pickens, 37 yards from the backup running back Jaylen Warren. That's over 220 rushing yards that were allowed in this game at a clip of 5 yards per carry. 3 runs of over 15 yards were also allowed throughout this game. But then you consider the fact that the Saints defensive line, who has been kind of making strides as a pass rushing unit, has not really been making strides so far this year as a run defense. And you consider the fact that they are being moved off the line of scrimmage 2-3 yards, especially as the snaps go on. I'll give you a bonus number here. It's 84 total plays, including penalties that were considered non-plays, run by the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. When that happens, defenses wear down, and that's going to allow you to get moved off the line of scrimmage. That allows 5.0 rushing yards per carry to happen. And the final number here, when it comes to New Orleans Saints defense, 4.8 yards per play by the Pittsburgh Steelers. This isn't a good number for the Pittsburgh Steelers. To kind of put that into perspective, the Steelers came into Week 10 up against the New Orleans Saints as the second worst team in the NFL when it came to yards gained per offensive play at just 4.73. The Saints effectively held them to their second worst league average throughout this game, but still couldn't capitalize on it over on the offensive side. So this is actually a good mark by the Saints offense. The issue is that the majority of the yardage that was allowed on the ground. So you're chewing the clock, you're extending drives, you're giving up a bunch of plays to penalty as well. You're talking about 6 first downs that were given up by the New Orleans Saints defense, surrendered due to penalty. So if you're holding the team or crossing you to 4.8 yards per play, you're usually in a really good place. But because of all of these other pieces that we're discussing that give you the full sort of tapestry of the game, they didn't help themselves out in terms of complimentary football around this number that could have been a very positive number for the New Orleans Saints. By the way, going into Week 10, the worst team in the NFL, I mentioned that the Steelers were the second worst when it came to yards per offensive play gained. The worst team in the NFL, Los Angeles Rams, who the Saints will meet this weekend at 4.71. Saints are 7th, by the way, in this metric, or were 7th, by the way, in this metric. And that's where we're going to kick off next. Because the Saints were averaging well above league average when it came to yards per play. But what if I told you that the Saints were worse in Week 10 than the NFL's worst offenses have been over the course of the season so far? That's the truth. And I'll explain as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. I'm going to give you the 3 most important numbers to tell the story around the Saints' performance on offense up next. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. Can we just pause the pod for just a sec? We good? We good? Okay, here's the thing. I want to make sure that you know everything you need to know about these new Built Bar reimagined flavors. Cookie dough topper, coconut brownie bar, coconut brownie topper as well. You've even got white chocolate peppermint granola. It's Built Bar's take on a granola bar so that it's more filling and still insanely tasty. Oh, and of course, candy cane brownie puff. Yeah, it's the Built Bar that's made with the marshmallows, but it's the world's most delicious cloud. And it's giving you all the protein that you need as well. They're revolutionizing nutrition as we know it with 100% real chocolate, but also 17 grams of protein and shockingly low when it comes to sugar and calories, just 130 calories. Absolutely insane. So you sink your teeth into the first bite, you're going to be changed forever. And a magical, wonderful time that you're going to have afterwards. You're probably wondering, which new flavor is my flavor? Well, an unanswered question to say the least, because they're all absolutely unbelievable and they're all different. So you can order a mix box. You could try all of the new flavors, all 5 of them for yourself. Built Bar. You got to try these. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off of your order right now. That's again, promo code LOCKEDON15 at Built.com. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with the three most important numbers that tell the story around the New Orleans Saints offensive struggles against the Pittsburgh Steelers this past weekend, including a yearly kind of, or maybe an annual low for the New Orleans Saints thus far. The Saints offense was back to being its own worst enemy against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday. Here are the three most important numbers that you need to know that illustrate that. So remember, we were just discussing about the New Orleans Saints defense holding Pittsburgh to 4.8 yards per play, which is just barely above their league average, which was second worst in the NFL. Well, the Saints offense topped that. And by top that, I mean they were worse than that. 4.1 yards per play. You remember, I mentioned the Los Angeles Rams coming into this game, league worst, coming into like week 10, was league worst at 4.71, but the Pittsburgh Steelers at second worst at 4.73. So more than half a yard worse per play on the New Orleans Saints offensive side against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is, as the kids say, mid. Worse than mid. It's unacceptable, is what it is. Especially when you think about it, you've got Chris Olave, you just returned Jarvis Landry, you have Taysom Hill, who usually can pick you up 4.1 yards per play by accident. Alvin Kamara as well. None of it worked for the New Orleans Saints, but they also didn't really give themselves a puncher's chance in many ways. If you're going to give yourself a puncher's chance, you got to swing. And if you put the ball in the hands of Taysom Hill 3 times, if you put the ball in the hands of Alvin Kamara 8 times, they're not going to really get that many opportunities to break things loose. And sometimes you need a chunk play here or there. Think back to the Seattle Seahawks game, the 3rd and 1s that they ran with the QB power, with the 2 extra offensive linemen on the field, running behind Landon Young each time. Landon Young was out on the field in this game. Running behind Landon Young each time, they picked up, 4 yards the first time, 5 yards the second time, and then 60 yards the third time. Sometimes you just have to keep punching. The Saints didn't really give themselves a puncher's chance. And I get it. The Steelers defense was really good in this game at limiting what the Saints could do on the ground. But, if your team has an identity, you stick with that identity. You don't let yourself kind of tuck your tail between your legs and then get run out because, the defense is performing too well against it. And this is one of the things that we've talked about from the very beginning of the season, is that there's no identity for this New Orleans Saints offense. And because there's no identity, there was nothing to kind of hold strong and do, right? There was no principle to lean on or anything like that. So the Saints ended up allowing themselves to get run out of running the ball in a game where there was never an insurmountable deficit. We've heard it over and over again. And I know the offensive line was injured. I get that. But the offensive line was injured and the Saints still ran behind it on a 3rd and 1 and tried to run a quarterback sneak on a 4th and 1. So if you're going to do that, then don't run away from the run game, right? If you're going to trust that, you got to trust the rest of it too. So it's identity, it's consistency, it's a commitment to what it is that the Saints want to do, and it's punching, right? Giving yourself that fighter's chance. The other part of that is that you only ran the ball 15 times, so you end up with a rushing average, and here is your second number of the day for the Saints offense, 1.9 rushing yards per attempt. So I know what you're going to think. I know what you're saying, right? Ross, you were just talking about how you have to keep running, but then you're saying that they only got 1.9 yards per run. Yeah. But you still have to commit to whatever your identity is. And so that's really the point that I'm trying to illustrate around the idea of keep running, keep punching, is that have an identity and stick to that identity. Right now, there isn't an identity, and it's something that the Saints have struggled with so far this season. 1.9 rushing yards per attempt, though, when you give up 15, rushes in, it's hard to combat that number. It's hard to raise that number, right? So there are a couple of things to take away from when it comes to this, right? How does this impact the game? Well, first of all, if you don't have the identity, you don't have the opportunity to keep punching, as we've discussed before. If you don't have the run game, then you're probably not extending drives. That's what happened with the New Orleans Saints in this one. They were outpossessed by over 17 minutes in this game, 17 minutes and 52 seconds. The Pittsburgh Steelers had the ball that much longer, more than a quarter longer. For the second week in a row for the New Orleans Saints offense, by the way, same thing happened with the Baltimore Ravens, over 15 minutes in that game. So you end up not being able to stay on the field. You end up not being able to extend your drives. You end up not being able to take back the clock a little bit. And if you're averaging 1.9 rushing yards on the ground and you abandon the run and then you just lean into the passing game, they know what to do. They know where you're going. And Andy Dalton wasn't under pressure very much in terms of like formal pressures, right? There are other ways that an injured offensive line impacts the quarterback, for sure, getting the ball out quickly, all these other things. But he was only pressured 9 times. But those 9 plays, those counted big for the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. 2 of those 9 plays were sacks. One of those remaining, 7 plays was an interception. And then the remaining passes that were thrown all ended up being mostly incomplete, with only 2 completions and 1 first down, an 11.1 passer rating when under pressure. Remember what one of the things that everyone kind of highlighted around Andy Dalton was that he was cool under pressure, that he had this calming presence, all that other stuff for the second week in a row. And for, the numerous times throughout the season so far, we haven't seen that actually translate out onto the field. This number helps to back that up. And more than this number actually helps to back it up, this number helps to exemplify what happens when you can't run the ball and you have a quarterback that can't sustain pressure. Because if you can't run the ball, the pressure's coming. Finally, 3. They were 3 of 12 in this game, converting only 25%. So again, not extending drives, not being able to stay on the field, giving up the ball, turnover on downs, turnovers down the field as well. You're not going to win games if you can't stay on the field and if your offense can't stay on the field, right? They only had 1 separate drive in which they possessed the ball and moved the ball more than 50 yards. They were aided by 15 penalty yards on that. That was the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half, the only life we really saw from the Saints offense in this game. And sorry, when I say first downs picked up, what I mean to say is 3 third down conversions right? Third downs converted. Sorry. 3 first downs gained on third down, right? Extending your drives, things like that. Compare that number to 6 first downs surrendered by penalty by the New Orleans Saints defense. You're going to have a bad time. All right, family. So will the New Orleans Saints hand things back over to Jameis Winston? Is he healthy enough for it? Will the offensive line be able to sustain the play of a quarterback that wants to go downfield, but also believes that he can dish the ball around the line of scrimmage? We'll break it all down. What if the New Orleans Saints do decide to move ahead with Jameis Winston moving forward? That's going to be tomorrow's episode, our Wednesday episode, and we'll break down. I'll give you some takeaways from the film breakdown and film watch that I do as well. So we'll break all of that down in tomorrow's episode, and then of course keep you up to date with everything going on around your New Orleans Saints and their already tumultuous quarterback situation. I appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, for your second listen, to go and check out Locked On Sports Today, making sure that you're getting the biggest stories, the take of the day, everything you need to know from the biggest moments around sports. You can find that on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. I appreciate you, as always, for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.